Wyoming Territory, 1883. The wind cut down from the Bighorn Mountains like a blade, sharp with dust and the faint smell of snow. Catherine Hale stood outside the dry goods store in Sheridan, clutching her thin shawl tighter around her shoulders. In her other hand, she held an empty basket, one she had hoped to fill with flour, beans, and maybe a bit of salt pork if luck was with her. But luck had not been with her for a long while. I said no credit. The shopkeeper barked from inside, already turning away before she could reply. His words hit harder than the wind. Catherine didn't argue. She simply nodded once, held her chin steady, and stepped off the wooden porch. Her stomach ached from going without food since yesterday, and her son Micah had eaten nothing more than half a biscuit that morning. Still, she would not cry, not in the middle of town where every glance felt like a weight. The hem of her dress dragged through the dirt street as she walked, blinking fast against the sting in her eyes. Sheridan was alive with noise around her. Wagon wheels creaked, horses stamped, men laughed outside the saloon. But she felt cut off, as though the whole town was turning its back. A few steps away, a man leaned against the post outside the livery. His hat was pulled low, his arms crossed over a coat that had seen long miles but was kept clean. His boots were scuffed, but they stood planted, as if no storm could move him. He watched her, not pretending otherwise. "You got turned away for food." His voice carried across the space between them, low and certain. Catherine stopped. The basket felt heavy, though it was empty. She stiffened, then gave a small nod. "I will figure something out," she said quietly, her eyes darting toward the road that led to her wagon. The man pushed off the post and stepped closer. He had a way about him, steady, unhurried, like he carried no doubts in his stride. "Come with me," he said, as simple as if he were offering his hand. "I'll fill your table tonight." Her grip tightened on the basket. "You do not even know me." "I don't need to," he said. "You've got a child to feed." "That's enough." Her gaze fell to the dust at their feet. "I cannot take charity." "It's not charity," he answered. "It's supper." "Come on." Something in his voice was firm, yet gentle, leaving no room for shame. Catherine looked up at him then, really looked. His face was weathered, but not hard. His eyes held a softness that didn't quite match his rugged frame, and there was a crease at the corner of his mouth, as though he had once smiled often but had forgotten how. He was not young, but not old either. Perhaps in his mid-30s. There was something steady in him that made her feel steadier just standing near. Slowly, she gave a small nod. He tipped his head, then turned and led her across the street to where his horse was tied beside a muddy buckboard wagon. "Name's Celas Whitlo," he said as he lifted the reins. "You can ride up front or follow behind." "Catherine Hale," she replied, climbing onto the seat. "My son is back at our place." "It's just outside town by the creek." Celas flicked the reins, and the wagon rolled forward. "Then, that's where we'll go." The ride was quiet, but it wasn't the heavy silence of strangers. It was the kind that left room for breath. The wagon wheels creaked along the dirt road as the sun dipped low, painting the hills in gold. Catherine found herself watching his hands on the reins, strong, weathered, steady hands that seemed to know both labor and restraint. When they turned off the main road and followed the creek, her small homestead came into sight. The cabin leaned slightly with age, its roof patched with tar paper and hope. A boy stood on the porch, barefoot and thin, watching with wide eyes as the wagon approached. "That your boy?" Celas asked. "Yes," Catherine said, her voice softening. "His name is Micah." "7." She nodded 7. "Looks sharp," Celas said. The wagon stopped, and Catherine climbed down, just as Micah ran to her. She caught him in her arms, lifting him with a strength born from need more than ease. "We have a guest," she told him gently. "He's going to help us tonight." Micah looked up at the stranger with hungry eyes. "You got food." Celas gave the boy a small smile. "I got more than that." "You like rabbit stew." Micah's face lit with a grin. "I do." From the back of the wagon, Celas began unloading supplies: salt pork, beans, potatoes, flour, even a good cut of venison wrapped in cloth. Catherine's breath caught at the sight. She opened her mouth to speak, but he shook his head as if to stop her. "Let's cook," he said simply. The cabin's kitchen was small, but once the fire caught, it was warm. Celas moved easily about, chopping vegetables while Catherine mixed flour and water for biscuits. Micah sat at the table, his eyes wide with anticipation as the smell of roasting meat filled the room. "You cook like a ranch wife," Catherine said after watching him work with quiet skill raised on a ranch. Celas replied, "My ma died when I was 16. Learned what I had to," she nodded slowly, stirring the pot. "Your father, gone before I can remember," he said, his eyes on the stew. "Any family now?" Catherine shook her head. "Just me and Micah." He didn't ask about her husband, and she didn't offer. Some stories were too heavy to share on the first night. But as the pot bubbled and the smell of stew filled the cabin, laughter stirred where it hadn't been in weeks. Micah ate with the hunger of a boy finally given a feast, and Catherine's heart ached watching him smile again. Later, after supper was cleared away and Micah tucked into bed, Catherine stepped onto the porch. The night was clear, the stars sharp against the dark sky. Celas stood at the rail, arms crossed, eyes turned upward. "Thank you," she said quietly. He looked over at her. "Anytime." "You didn't have to do this. I wanted to." "You're kind," she whispered. He shrugged. "I don't know about that." "You are," she said firmly. "It's been a long time since someone showed us kindness." He met her eyes, and for a moment the silence between them felt like a promise. "It doesn't have to be the last time," he said. Her heart beat faster. Not from fear, but from something she thought she had lost years ago. "Hope you mean that," she asked. "I do." The porch boards creaked under their boots. The night air was sharp, but she felt warm. "Will you come back tomorrow?" she asked. "I will," he said, without a pause. She smiled. Real, full, alive. Good. Celas tipped his hat. "Good night, Catherine. Good night, Celas." He walked down the path to his wagon, the wheels creaking as he turned back toward town. Just before the bend in the road, he looked back. She was still there, standing on the porch, watching him go, waiting for him to return. The next morning came with frost across the cabin windows and a pale rose sky above the hills. Catherine moved quietly through the small room, adding a log to the fire, while Micah still slept under his quilt. She set oats to boil, but her thoughts kept drifting to the wagon tracks outside. A single set of hoofprints pressed deep in the frozen lane, leading away toward Sheridan. She stood on the porch with her shawl pulled tight, studying them as though they were a letter left behind. By mid-morning, she heard hooves again. Slow, steady, deliberate. Her heart beat a little quicker. She wiped her hands on her apron as Celas rode into the yard, his coat buttoned high against the cold. He dismounted and tied his reins, meeting her eyes like a man who already knew his welcome. "You found your way back?" Catherine said. "I did." Celas replied. Roads rougher past the creek, but the horse didn't mind. She stepped aside from the door. "Come in, if you're not in a rush." "Not in any particular one," he said, following her inside and setting his hat by the hearth. Micah looked up from the corner where he was playing with a small block of wood. His face lit in quiet recognition. Catherine touched his shoulder gently. "You remember Mr. Whitlo?" "Yes, ma'am," Micah answered quickly. Celas gave a slow nod. "Morning, son. You help your mama with the chores." "Yes, sir. I carry wood. Feed the hens, too." "That's good work," Celas said, not talking down to him. "Just plain cabin this size doesn't run itself." Catherine poured hot water into a basin. "There's fence down out back. A deer broke through last week." "I can take a look if you've got spare wire," Celas offered, already rolling up his sleeves. Her surprise showed, though she tried to hide it. "I've some rolled under the lean-to. Then I'll get started before the ground hardens more," he said, glancing out the window at the pale winter sun. While he worked, Catherine sat near the window with her sewing basket. She patched Micah's shirts, pausing now and then to watch Celas move along the broken fence line. He worked quietly, each motion steady, purposeful. He didn't fidget, didn't grumble, just did what needed doing. Something about that steadiness filled the air inside the cabin with a peace she hadn't known in years. By midday, the fence stood straight again. Celas came in with dirt on his boots and a scrape across his forearm. He didn't mention it. Catherine handed him a plate with last night's biscuits and slices of ham she'd saved. He sat near the fire to eat, stretching his long legs out across the floor. "You've got good land here," he said, glancing around the cabin. Water close by, trees for shelter. "It was my husband's," she said softly, eyes on her sewing. "We came from Kansas 5 years back. He built the beams with his own hands." Celas grew quiet. "He passed here." She nodded once 2 winters ago. Fever took him fast. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It held weight, but not the kind that pressed her down. Instead, it felt like the quiet of someone who understood loss and respected its shape. "I buried my mother near Laramie," Celas said after a moment. "She liked the wind there. Said it kept her honest." Catherine looked up. "And your father?" "Gone before I can remember. After Ma, it was just me." Her hand paused on the fabric. "You've been alone a long time." He shrugged slightly. "Took work where I could. Drove cattle north, built rail grade, rode dispatch. Never stayed long anywhere." "Are you planning to stay now?" she asked carefully. Celas met her eyes. "Any reason I shouldn't?" She shook her head slowly. "No reason I can think of that afternoon." He rode into town for supplies. Catherine walked him out to his horse. "You don't owe us anything," she told him. "I know," he said simply. "That's not why I'm coming back." Her hand lifted without thought, brushing a bit of dust from his coat collar. "Then I'll be here." He nodded once, mounted, and rode down the lane. This time she watched until he disappeared beyond the bend in the creek. By late afternoon he returned, wagon wheels cracking the thin ice in the ruts. He carried a crate down from the bed. "Found window glass," he said. "Traded a pair of stirrups for it. Fellow at the smithy owed me." Catherine's eyes widened. "I'll keep it wrapped till spring. No sense fixing pains while the ground's frozen." "I brought oilcloth too," he added. "Might keep the cold out. For now?" Micah ran from inside, hair sticking up unevenly. "I finished the kindling," he said proudly. "You haul it yourself?" Celas asked. "Yes, sir." Dragged it in a sack. "Next time, twist the top and tie it off. Stops it from catching," Celas said, his voice easy. Micah nodded quickly, absorbing every word. Catherine noticed the way her boy stood straighter, as though wanting to prove himself. She also noticed the warmth in her chest at seeing it. That night, the 3 of them ate stew stretched thin with turnips, but Micah laughed more than he had in months. After supper, Catherine stitched by the fire while Celas worked on an old harness from the lean-to, his knife cutting leather with slow precision. The silence between them had changed. It wasn't the quiet of strangers anymore. It was the hush of people learning to belong in the same room. Catherine glanced at him across the lamplight. "You ever think of settling down somewhere for good?" He didn't look up from the strap. "I did once. North of Cheyenne. But the landowner ran out of gold and promises. Sold the place out from under me." She nodded. Trust is built in the space between words. His hands paused. He looked up at her, eyes steady. "And you? You ever want someone beside you again?" She swallowed, her needle trembling between her fingers. "I thought about it, but thinking and trusting are different things." He leaned forward slightly. "Then I'll say this plain. I'm not here to pass through. I'll stay if you'll have me." The fire cracked. The cabin walls seemed to hold their breath. Catherine's heart pounded, not from fear, but from something she had nearly forgotten. Hope. Snow began to fall heavy the next day, trailing down from the gray Wyoming sky without hurry. By noon, it covered the ground, softening every sound until the world outside the cabin seemed wrapped in silence. Catherine stood on the back stoop with her shawl drawn tight, watching Celas split kindling in the yard. His coat was soaked with snow, his breath a white cloud, but his movements never slowed. "You'll catch your death," she called softly. He set the wood down and brushed the snow from his sleeves. "I've had worse from a mountain spring. This is soft weather." She smiled faintly, shaking her head. "You speak like a man who's known many places. Enough to know the wind sounds different in each," he said, then carried the wood inside. The cabin grew warm quickly, filled with the crackle of fire and the smell of stew simmering on the stove. Micah sat near the hearth, carving a stick into the shape of a bird, his face bright with concentration. Celas crouched beside him, watching. "You ever seen a snowshoe rabbit?" he asked. Micah shook his head. "They turn white when the snow comes. Makes them near impossible to spot unless you know where to look." "Smart little things," Micah grinned. "Think we'll see one?" "Maybe," Celas said. "But you'd have to be quick to catch it." Catherine listened from the stove, her hands still though the spoon hovered over the pot. There was an ease in his voice when he spoke to her boy, the kind of steady tone that carried both strength and care. She had not heard that sound in her home for years. That night, they ate by lamplight. The stew was thin, stretched with turnips and barley, but laughter at the table made it taste rich. When Micah was tucked beneath his quilt, Catherine and Celas sat near the fire. She folded shirts in her lap while he worked at the old harness, his knife pressing new life into cracked leather. "You ever think about what comes next?" she asked quietly. "Not in the way most folks do," he said, still working. "What way then?" "I don't make plans past the next sunrise. Keeps the ground steadier under me." Her hands paused on the fabric. "You ever want something steadier than that?" For a long moment, the only sound was the crack of the fire. Then he set the strap aside and looked at her. "I might, if it came quiet and sure. If it didn't ask for more than I had to give her heartbeat quick and strong." "Do you think you've found that here?" He didn't answer at once. His eyes moved over the small cabin, the patched roof, the worn boards, the boy sleeping under a thin quilt, and then back to her. "I think I've found something worth holding on to," he said. She rose and crossed the room, sitting near enough that their knees almost touched. "There's room here," she whispered. "Not just in the cabin, but in our lives." He reached out slowly, his calloused fingers brushing hers with care. "Then I'd like to stay. Not for the night. For good." Catherine swallowed hard, her throat tight with tears she didn't hide. This time Micah's old enough to remember what it means when someone leaves. "I won't promise him anything that won't be kept." Celas's grip tightened, sure and steady. "Then I promise him this: I'll be here. I'll work this land, and I'll shape a life with you both." She pressed her hand against his, her voice breaking but strong. "Then stay." He drew her gently into his arms. For the first time in years, Catherine let herself lean against another, the weight of sorrow lifting into something new. Hope. That spring, Celas built a new chicken coop with Micah, teaching him how to square corners and test a beam's strength by feel. He planted corn alongside Catherine, repaired the roof, and added a second-hand rocking chair by the hearth. In June, they married under the cottonwoods by the creek. Catherine wore her mother's brooch. Micah held the ring cut from a silver coin Celas had carried since his trail days. And the preacher rode out from town. There was no music, but they danced anyway, barefoot in the grass, laughing under the Wyoming sky. By winter, the pantry was full, the roof held strong, and the cabin was warmer than it had ever been. Micah had grown taller, stronger, his cheeks full, and his laughter easy. He called Celas Pa, without being asked. Sometimes at night, Catherine and Celas sat together on the porch, her hand tucked into his, both watching the land settle into sleep. He didn't speak much, but he didn't need to. She understood him now the way one understands the shape of wood beneath the hand or the sound of wind carrying old stories. And when he bent his head to press a kiss to her temple, she closed her eyes, knowing this was not the end of their story. It was the beginning of all the rest.